this story is the reason I don't ignore a bad feeling anymore, no matter how badly my body is telling me to. This was a couple summers back, in the middle of a vicious heat wave, and I was running pizzas for a little local shop that was absolutely buried that night, just non-stop out and back, in this thick, soapy heat that never broke even after dark. I was hustling so hard to keep my times down that I kept slamming whole bottles of water between runs. And I completely lost track of the fact that the water has to go somewhere. By the time I rolled out on a delivery around midnight, way out in a rural, wooded part of the country, the need to find a bathroom had gone from a background nag to a 5-minute emergency in the space of about 2 miles. The address was down a dark, twisting country lane where the houses were set way back and separated by acres of sword forest. When I finally crouched into the gravel driveway, I actually felt relieved because I recognized the place. I'd run pizzas out here a couple of times before. A young woman lived here, early 20s, always friendly and always tipped well. I grabbed the box and walked up, and the whole house was dark. And I knocked and got nothing. So I called the number of the receipt. I rang a few times and then she picked up. And right away she sounded off, breathing hard, kind of gasping for air. "Yeah," she said, clipped and tight. I said, "Hey, it's your pizza delivery," more or less crossing my legs on her porch. "There doesn't seem to be anybody home." She said, "Yes, I'm not home." And I was so wrecked by my bladder that my brain-to-mouth filter just quit. "Oh man," I said, "is there anywhere safe I can leave this? Because I've got a real emergency and I need a bathroom or a bush or literally anything." And there was this pause on the line. And when she came back, her whole voice has changed. The breathless, pushing me off tone was gone. And its place was something small and shaking and absolutely terrified. She said, "Listen to me. I'm not running late. I'm not on my way home. I'm out of town. I never ordered a pizza." The fog in my head cleared instantly and my blood went cold. I said, "What?" She said, "I didn't order anything." But now she started crying. She said, "I'm 3 hours away. My home app just altered me that somebody logged into my food account from my computer. Whoever ordered that pizza is inside my house right now. You need to leave." My heart slammed against my ribs. I stared at the dark front door and understood all at once that somebody was standing on the other side of it, a few feet away. But my body was locked up in a shock, and the emergency in my bladder completely hijacked whatever sense I had. And this insane thought went through my head, that if I bolted, they would know that I knew. So, trying to look like a guy who suspected nothing, I stepped off the porch and walked over to the biggest and thickest bush along the front walk, right up against the house, and I stepped into its shadow and finally let go. My eyes darting all over that black yard the whole time. The relief lasted about 3 seconds, because standing there, I started to hear a sound coming out of the bush. Not leaves in the wind, something heavier, a steady, wet, rhythmic sound. I squinted into the black tangle of branches, and maybe 2 feet away from my face, folded down into the hollow center of that bush, was the shape of a huge man, dressed all in dark, pressed flat into the dirt right beside me, staring straight up at me. The wet sound I'd been hearing was me, hitting the shoulder of his jacket. He knew he'd been made. His eyes snapped onto mine in the moonlight, and out him came this deep, gravelly sound, and he came up out of the branches like an animal breaking over. I didn't even zip up. I flat out ran, tore across the gravel, and threw myself into the car. And my foot was on the gas before the door had even shut, tires shrieking and kicking rock into the dark as I fishtailed out of here. I drove blind for about 2 miles until I hit a lit intersection and pulled over. I was shaking so hard I couldn't get a full breath. I called 911. About an hour later, they called me back for a statement. They flooded the property, but the guy was gone. But there was a fresh signs of a break-in at the back window. When the officers finally came and went looked into that bush, the exact hollow where he'd been folded up waiting, they found a beat-up drawstring bag. Inside it was a big hunting knife, a roll of heavy-duty duct tape. He never hacked that girl's account for a free pizza. He used it to call the delivery driver out an empty house in the middle of nowhere so he could sit in the dark with a kill kit and wait for whoever come walking up to that door. It was a brutally cold Friday, close to 1 in the morning in the back end of November. The kind of cold that gets into your teeth the second you step out of the car. I was grinding out the last stretch of a 10-hour shift, just trying to clear my payout goal so I could go home. Then a double order lit up on my screen. 2 separate restaurants, 2 separate bags, except the 2 places were maybe 40 feet apart in the same little plaza, and both orders were headed to the exact same address. That was actually the first thing that scratched me. Why pay 2 deliveries fees when you could order everything from one spot? But the tip was big and the drop-off was only a few minutes out, so I took it and didn't think much about it. The GPS pulled me off the bright main road and steered me into one of the older historic parts of town, where the streetlights got farther and farther apart and threw these long, thin shadows across the road. I rolled up to the address and just sat there for a second looking at it. It was big, heavy old building, the kind that started life as an apartment block with wide concrete staircases sweeping up both sides of the front. But at some point, it had been gutted and turned into one enormous private home. And every window in the place was black, not a single light on anywhere. I glanced back at my phone and the note under it said, "Hand it to me," and underneath that, "Come upstairs." My stomach pulled into a cold little knot. I grabbed both bags anyway, told myself I was being dramatic, and started up the left-hand staircase, and my own footsteps were way too loud in all that silence. At the top there was a heavy wooden door with a pane of glass set into the upper half, and when I looked through it, I could see straight down a long, dim hallway into the house. Way back in the depths of it, a TV was flickering on the wall with the sound all the way off, throwing this cold blue-gray light over the peeling wallpaper. Closer to me, on the little table just inside the door, a candle had been burnt almost down to nothing, wobbling out a low orange glow. I knocked hard and nothing. I stood there while the quiet stretched out, and I started to feel really exposed upon that landing. So I pulled up my phone and texted the customer that I was at the door with the food. And through the glass, at that same little table right next to the candle, I watched the phone screen light up and start buzzing against the wood. Somebody was home. Somebody was standing close enough to that table to have picked it up. They just weren't answering. Something old in the back of my skull started screaming at me to leave. I stopped caring about the rating. I sat both bags down on the concrete, snapped a fast photo to prove I dropped it, and turned around to get back down, but as fast as I could without breaking into a run. I was halfway down when I heard the door unlatch behind me. I did not turn around, but in that dead freezing air, a man's voice carried down to me, and it wasn't aimed at me at all. It was a low, hard, hurried whisper to somebody else back inside the door. He said, "Hurry up, she's leaving." Every nerve in my body lit up at once. I half slid, half fell down the rest of the steps, scraping my shoes, and threw myself into the car and hammered the lock button. The driveway was hemmed in this big overgrown oaks, so I couldn't just pull straight out. I had to crank a 3-point turn to get back to the road. As I swung the car around, my headlights right across the front of the house. I looked up. Standing in the 2 of the black upstairs windows were 2 huge, broad figures, dead still, staring straight down into my car, while my lights bounced off the glass. And down at the ground level, a side door into the basement that had been shut a minute ago was now hanging wide open into the dark yard. I threw it into drive and tore off down the gravel road and never once looked back in the mirror. I have no idea who lived there or who was the man waiting in the dark, but I know for a fact it was never about the food. If you made it all the way to the end, please do me a favor, hit the like button and subscribe button and comment for me to support the channel, and thank you very much.